Okay, let's just jump right into this. Have you ever looked at the very first two verses of the Bible and, I don't know, just sensed a missing chapter? Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're investigating what I like to call a cosmic cold case. We're going to dive deep into the linguistic clues of ancient Hebrew to unpack a really dramatic narrative known as the gap creation theory. We're talking about a prehistoric timeline that weaves together ancient texts, geological destruction, and a literal lost world. So we have to begin with a massive question, one that kind of bridges the gap between theology and science. Did the dinosaurs exist between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2? We're anchoring our investigation right here, in what geologists call the KPG boundary. If you look at rock strata all over the planet, there's this visible, undeniable destruction layer. It's packed with iridium, which is a rare element heavily associated with meteorites. And this exact geological line separates the age of reptiles, the dinosaurs, from the age of mammals. So the big question is, how on earth does this fit into a biblical timeline?
Well, this brings us to a really fascinating concept. Gap creationists propose that Genesis chapter 1 doesn't actually describe the initial creation of the universe at all. Instead, it's describing a recreation, a complete restoration of a ruined world. By inserting a literal gap between the first two verses of the Bible, this theory actually finds room for the deep antiquity of the Earth. That includes the entire era of the dinosaurs, tucked right into the space between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. Now, what's super interesting here is the jarring shift in the text itself. Just look at Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, right? It implies a flawless, perfect initial creation in deep antiquity. But then, abruptly, we hit verse 2. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. I mean, there is a striking, undeniable contrast between the perfect creation in verse 1 and this dark, chaotic state of the earth in verse 2.
To really grasp what's happening here, we have to look at the original Hebrew. Our very first major clue lies in the Hebrew word tohu. Now, this is usually translated in English as without form, but tohu carries a much, much heavier meaning than that. It actually denotes a state of absolute waste. We're talking chaotic desolation or confusion. It's not just a blank, unpainted canvas waiting for a brush. It is a state of total wreckage.
And tohu is paired with our next crucial word, bohu. This translates directly to emptiness or destruction. So when you put them together, tohu and bohu, you are framing Genesis 1:2 not as some unformed lump of clay just waiting to be sculpted, but as a scene of absolute ruin. The earth wasn't just empty. It had literally been reduced to a wasteland.
So what of all this is how it connects to the rest of the text. The linguistic friction becomes totally obvious when we cross-reference Genesis with Isaiah 45:18. Isaiah explicitly states that God created it not a waste, and he uses that exact same Hebrew word tohu. Well, if God didn't create the earth in a state of tohu, then the chaos, the darkness, and the desolation we just saw in Genesis 1:2 absolutely had to have happened after the initial creation, meaning something destroyed it. And further evidence for this comes from how these exact words are used elsewhere. The joint use of tohu and bohu only pops up in two other places in the entire Bible, Isaiah 34 and Jeremiah 4. And in both of those passages, these words are strictly used in the context of wartime destruction falling upon what was a previously peaceful and populated land. It's always a picture of violent, catastrophic ruin inflicted as a judgment.
Which leaves us staring at what is essentially a massive planetary crime scene. I mean, if the Earth was created perfectly in deep antiquity and then reduced to a destroyed, chaotic wasteland of tohu and bohu, we have to ask the obvious question. What catastrophic event caused this cosmic fall? What could possibly unleash this level of wartime devastation before humanity even existed?
That brings us to the first big piece of the puzzle, the angelic rebellion, our theological suspect. According to the gap creation theory, the explanation for this prehistoric destruction is actually a massive spiritual war. Proponents point directly to really vivid texts like Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. These passages describe a covering cherub, someone who was perfect from the exact day he was created, but who became filled with pride and led a full-blown rebellion against heaven. This being, who is often identified as Lucifer, famously declared, "I will exalt my throne above the stars of God." You see, this wasn't just a minor disagreement in the ranks. It was a full-scale spiritual war that allegedly cast the earth itself into this chaotic tohu and bohu state. And this is where it brilliantly illustrates theology meeting geology. Gap creationists tether the spiritual warfare to actual, physical evidence on earth.
most notably the Chicxulub crater impact. Just picture this, an asteroid up to 9 miles wide, slamming into the Earth at Mach 58. To put that into perspective, that is 12 miles every single second. An impact like that unleashed an extinction event that literally blocked out the sun with a massive soot cloud. It perfectly mirrors the dark, flooded, devastated tohu and bohu state described in Genesis 1:2. Now let's look at how we resolve this. Ruin and recreation, bridging the gap. So if the Earth was ruined by this epic angelic conflict, what exactly is happening in the rest of Genesis chapter 1? To resolve this, theorists point out a really fascinating detail in the Sabbath commandment found in Exodus 20, which summarizes the 6 days. It uses the Hebrew word asah, which means to do, to repair, or to complete. Notice it does not use the word bara, which means to create from absolutely nothing, which is the specific word notably used back in Genesis 1:1. This entire concept of repairing an already existing world aligns perfectly with Psalm 104. This psalm explicitly describes God sending forth His Spirit to renew the face of the earth. Think about it. You can only renew something that already existed but fell into decay or destruction. The 6 days, then, are actually about clearing that dark atmosphere, reordering the chaos, and bringing life back to a dead rock.
Furthermore, ancient Jewish philosophers like Philo and Josephus noted something very peculiar about the original Hebrew of Genesis 1:5. When describing the first day of the Genesis week, the text actually calls it one day rather than the first day. In the context of the gap theory, this is a huge clue. It subtly implies there had been other, prior days in the Earth's history way before the specific renewal process ever began.
So when you put it all together, the entire gap creation model constructs a really comprehensive timeline. It looks like this. It starts with a perfect creation in deep antiquity. Then an unknown vast period of prehistory unfolds, culminating in that angelic rebellion. This rebellion results in cosmic ruin and brutal physical extinction events here on Earth, plunging our planet into tohu and bohu. Finally, the whole timeline concludes with a familiar 6-day Genesis week, which serves as a rapid, functional renewal of our planet. Now you might be thinking, okay, this is just some modern attempt to squeeze geology into the Bible. But actually it's not. Texts ranging from the 7th century English Cadman's hymn all the way to the 18th century printing of the Book of Joshua explicitly mention the earth being formed a second time. Even ancient Mesopotamian texts, like the Babylonian Enuma Elish, feature a primordial era of spiritual war, monsters, and chaos that completely precedes the creation of man. This core idea of order coming out of prehistoric chaos, it is incredibly ancient. Which leaves us with a really profound, lingering thought to wrap up our explainer today. The prophet Isaiah actually speaks of God's desire to plant the heavens. If the gap theory accurately describes our ancient Earth being restored from a ruined, chaotic state of tohu and bohu, could the countless dead, decaying planets in our wider universe currently sitting in that exact same state be waiting for their own future recreation? It's a staggering thought to consider the next time you look up at the stars.